Hi, I'm Thalassa. I drove 7 hours through mountains and silence to make it to my brother's wedding, only to find out my name wasn't on the program, or the family photo, or the seating chart. I gave $3,000 to help. My mom said it wasn't enough. My dad threw wine in my face. And then, someone deleted my speech from the video lineup like I never existed. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part? They planned it all, quietly, together. So, what would you do when your own family decides you're easier to erase than include? The road twisted through the forest like it was trying to shake me off. 7 hours from Durango to Flagstaff, and the silence on the other end was louder than the engine. No text, no, "Are you close?" Nothing. Just me, the pine trees, and the steady hum of tires gripping pavement. I should have taken that as a hint. I'd stopped for gas once, filled up on cheap coffee and a bag of trail mix, all while imagining my arrival, someone waving from the gate, maybe even a warm hug. But when I pulled into the gravel lot behind the venue, it was already crowded with SUVs and rented sedans. A valet handed me a paper tag without looking up. No greeting, no recognition. I wasn't expected. Or worse, I'd been forgotten. The venue was beautiful in a way that made you feel unwelcome if you didn't match it. Draped fairy lights, people in curated beige and navy. I stepped into the check-in area, scanning for something familiar. I caught sight of Romilda, my mother, standing near a floral arch, laughing too hard at something Cyrene had said. My sister was glowing, lip gloss perfect, eyes highlighted just enough. Cameras orbited her like she was royalty. I didn't expect a red carpet, but I didn't expect to be invisible either. "Guest list name?" a young assistant asked, without glancing up. "Thalassa," I said, my voice steady. She ran her pen down the sheet, tapped her tablet, and handed me a name tag. "Table N, by the kitchen entrance." I stared at it. "Is that near the restroom?" She shrugged. "I guess." So that was my place. Behind the hydrangea wall, next to where waiters cut through with empty trays and full bladders, I pinned the tag on and walked in, past glass doors that led to the main lawn. My heels clicked against the polished wood, each step reminding me of just how far I'd driven to be parked beside a trash bin and a folding chair. The ceremony hadn't started yet, but the performance had. I found a spot near the back, feigning interest in the guest book. A couple I didn't recognize walked by, nodding politely. No one said my name. No one asked if I needed water or where I'd come from. Cyrene stood at the center of it all. A drone hovered above her, while a photographer knelt to get her best angle. Her dress shimmered under the early sun, tailored perfectly to a waist I used to share until life split us in different directions. "She still doesn't get it," Romilda said to someone behind me. "Some people just have the it factor. Others, try." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I knew that tone, that smile, that dismissive drawl of hers that always sounded like a compliment if you didn't listen too closely. But I was always listening. That was my problem. I moved to my assigned seat, tucked near a lattice trellis where sound from the kitchen leaked out between courses. Table N wasn't even dressed like the others. The centerpiece was missing, and a lone votive candle flickered in a cracked glass holder. My place card had my name misspelled. 2 L's, 1 S. I sat down, adjusted my dress, and tried to remember why I came. $3,000. That's why. I'd wired it 2 weeks ago, transferred directly into the wedding fund Cyrene had set up, just in case anyone wanted to help, she had said in the family group chat, one I was routinely left unread in. The money came with no note, no thanks, not even a thumbs-up emoji. Still, I wrote a card, handwritten, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the silver envelope. Wrote her name in calligraphy because I knew she loved that kind of thing. Because I cared. Because maybe, just maybe, showing up would remind them that I still belonged. I didn't come to be praised, but I didn't come to be erased either. Romilda spotted me an hour later near the hors d'oeuvre station. She didn't smile. "You drove all that way?" she asked, scanning my dress. "For just this?" I tilted my head, pretending to chew the cracker I hadn't touched. "Yeah," I said, "for just this." She nodded once, eyes moving past me before walking away. I turned to grab a napkin and bumped into a tall gift box being handed to Cyrene. She squealed in delight, tearing into the white and gold ribbon. A glimmering designer clutch sat nestled in a sea of silk. Cameras clicked. A round of applause followed. Romilda leaned in and whispered something into Cyrene's ear, both of them glancing in my direction. Cyrene giggled, covered her mouth, and waved it off like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It never was. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat and stepped back into the shadows near the stone column. I should have known better. But this? This was just the beginning. I stayed at the edge of the courtyard, half hidden behind a potted fig tree, watching Cyrene hold court like she was born into it. Her dress sparkled under the filtered light. Guests gravitated to her like moths to a porch lamp. They called her radiant. They asked about her podcast. They told her she looked like the kind of woman who had figured it all out. I'd once figured out how to survive on ramen and rent 3 weeks late, but I guess that kind of figuring didn't photograph as well. No one approached me. I was there, but not present. Seen, but unremarkable. My smile had become something of a reflex, a polite shield against the discomfort of being the one people politely forget. I refilled my own water, adjusted my dress collar myself, and I stood there while Cyrene had 2 stylists and a makeup girl hover over her like she was the bride. Romilda's voice rose above the rest, just enough for me to hear. Cyrene handled it all. The dress, the florist, even the photographer. She's really the only reason this is running smoothly. I turned my head slightly, not enough to be noticed, but enough to see Romilda holding court herself. Her hands gestured grandly as if she were conducting an orchestra. Every word was meant to impress. There was no mention of the $3,000 I'd wired weeks ago. No word about the extra time I'd spent helping their accountant with the wedding ledger last fall. They remembered the glitter. They forgot the glue. I found Romilda again near the shade of the pergola, fiddling with a stack of place cards. "Did you get the transfer?" I asked calmly. She didn't look up. "It was a nice gesture," she said. "But we thought you'd do more. I mean, he is your brother." My breath didn't catch. It didn't even stumble. I just felt this internal switch flip from warm to cold. "Of course," I said. "Because money only matters when it comes with applause, right?" She glanced at me briefly, a smile just sharp enough to cut. "Don't be dramatic, Thalassa. We all contribute in different ways, some more visibly than others." That line stayed with me as I walked away. Some more visibly than others. Like visibility was a virtue I'd failed to earn. Later, I stood at the edge of the lawn while Cyrene practiced her speech, her voice carried with effortless charm. Family means showing up, not just being around. It means participating, not spectating. A few people laughed. One guest turned to me and said, "That's funny. You must be the introvert sibling, huh?" I nodded without blinking. "Sure," I said. Something like that. The burn of that moment lingered longer than it should have, not because it was cruel. It wasn't. It was careless, and somehow that felt worse. I slipped away again, this time to the side garden, the kind with too many sculptures and too little seating. I sat on a stone bench and pulled out my phone, checked the banking app. The $3,000 was still there, now long buried in someone else's spreadsheet. No thank you, no emoji. Just vanished into the grand production of Cyrene's curated wedding weekend. I thought about all the months I'd spent budgeting for that gift, cutting out weekends, skipping spa appointments, saying no to small indulgences, all because I thought showing up with a real gift would mean I mattered. The group chat had stayed silent, of course. I could post a prayer request, and they'd still only comment under Cyrene's new photo shoot. I considered leaving, just slipping out, calling it. But a small voice inside me, calmer now than angry, told me to stay. Not for them. For me. I hadn't come to be seen. I came because I was tired of disappearing. Later, I found myself seated near the catering table, blending into the floral wallpaper. Cyrene was being mic'd up for a sit-down interview with some lifestyle blogger. A camera crew adjusted lighting while Romilda dabbed powder on Cyrene's nose. "This wedding is such a testament to family unity," the blogger said as they adjusted angles. I leaned back in my chair, crossed my arms, and murmured under my breath. Unity has never been so curated. I stepped into the guest suite like I was trespassing. No one said it, but I could feel it, the subtle resistance in the way people paused when I passed, the invisible line drawn between guests of honor and the rest of us. The room had a half-eaten fruit tray, 2 untouched teapots, and a folded linen napkin stained with what looked like lipstick that wasn't mine. For a brief second, it was quiet. No clinking glasses, no curated laughter, no sound checks or playlist rehearsals. Just me, a faded couch, and a window that overlooked the garden. I sat and sank into the silence, my fingers tracing the seam of the armrest like it was a lifeline. On the stone path beyond the glass, I saw her. Elzira. She was sitting by the fountain, shoulders slightly hunched, her purse in her lap like she was guarding something precious. Her head turned slowly, and her eyes met mine. No nod, no smile, just a steady gaze that didn't demand anything. That was her way. Her eyes didn't ask if I was okay. They told me she knew I wasn't. Some love doesn't need noise. It just needs to exist. I blinked and turned away, the heat of that connection too much to hold for long. That's when the whisper came back to me. Romilda, smiling too wide as she told a guest earlier. Oh, Cyrene has been a godsend with Grandma. She coordinated all her care this year. Truly stepped up. I stood there then, frozen. Not because it was a lie, but because it was such a practiced one. Cyrene had been in Cabo 3 times this year alone. She couldn't even spell the name of Grandma's pharmacy, let alone know how to refill her blood pressure medication. I had the receipts. Literally, 4 years. 4 years of auto-shipped groceries, covered co-pays, and weekly FaceTimes. I used to sit cross-legged on my floor, laptop propped on a pillow, guiding Elzira through virtual banking so she wouldn't get scammed. I once overnighted her a new set of heating pads when her old ones blew out during a February cold snap. And yet, Romilda had erased all of it with 1 glass of wine and a lie served with canapes. They didn't just forget. They rewrote it. I walked over to the tea tray, poured myself a lukewarm cup, and sat back down on the edge of the couch, the anger boiling too quiet to scream. I looked down at my own hands, still trembling slightly, and thought about when those hands used to build things with Cyrene. We weren't always this way. We used to be inseparable. We'd build blanket forts in the basement, trade comic books, fight over who got to be Storm when we played X-Men in the yard. Back then, the only injustice we understood was who got the bigger scoop of ice cream. But then she got the scholarship to NYU. I stayed closer to home, working part-time while getting my degree. She became the one who sparkled. I became the one who held the ladder. Somewhere along the way, being dependable became synonymous with being disposable. I heard a knock at the open door. Soren stood there, his tie half done, face flushed like he'd just jogged over from a bad conversation. Hey, he said, awkwardly stepping in. I didn't get up. Hey. He glanced around. You okay? I let out a dry laugh. Define okay? He scratched his jaw. Romilda told a few people Cyrene took care of Grandma. I know that probably didn't sit right with you. That's one way to put it. He looked at me, uneasy. Let's not make this about you, okay? It's her wedding weekend. And there it was. The line I'd heard in 1,000 different variations over the years. Let's not make this about you. Don't bring up what you did. Don't ask to be acknowledged. Just stay useful. Stay quiet. I stood up, smoothing out my dress. So it's never about me. Got it. Soren reached out like he might say something else, but didn't. Just stepped back and let me pass. Before I left the suite, I noticed a stack of programs sitting on the side table. I picked one up, flipped to the back where the special thanks section lived. Cyrene's name was in bold, Romilda's too. Even the florist had a mention. Mine wasn't there. They didn't just want me quiet. They wanted me erased. By the time cocktail hour began, the shadows had stretched long over the courtyard, casting a cooler glow over an otherwise heated atmosphere. Guests clinked glasses filled with rosé and complimented each other's outfits like they'd rehearsed it. I stood near a tall heater that wasn't turned on, clutching a glass of sparkling water I had poured myself. A man I vaguely remembered from a holiday 3 years ago approached, smiling like we were old friends. You must be the mysterious one they never talk about, he said with a chuckle, like it was clever. I gave him a half smile. Mystery is just the polite word for erasure, I replied. He blinked, unsure if it was a joke. I let the silence answer for me and drifted away. Cyrene had planted herself at the heart of a circle of friends, her laughter perfectly pitched for the nearby camera crew. One of her friends, a woman in a sequined jumpsuit, leaned in with an exaggerated gasp and asked, "Wait, is that your sister?" Cyrene, without missing a beat, raised her glass and said, "At least I didn't just show up to take pictures and wear heels." Laughter erupted. Heads turned. A few eyes found me. I didn't flinch, didn't move. I simply stared back, letting the punchline hang in the air. "That's just how the quiet ones are," one of my aunts said under her breath. "They let things build and then snap." I walked off before they could see what my face did. I wasn't about to let them turn me into a spectacle. The restroom became my sanctuary. I locked the door and looked at myself in the mirror. Lipstick bleeding at the edges, eyes puffier than I wanted to admit. I pulled out a tube and started to reapply it, but then stopped, stared at myself. No lipstick's deep enough to silence this ache. I dropped the tube in the trash. Back outside, the sun had dipped behind the trees. The light changed, softened, and with it, the temperature of the party. Still, the performances went on. I spotted Romilda near the rose arch, her back perfectly straight, her voice raised in practiced elegance. When she noticed me walking by, she barely hesitated before offering her commentary in a tone too casual to be kind. "That dress is very homey," she said to the woman beside her, eyes still on me. "Sweet, she dressed up." My hand curled slightly around my clutch, nails biting into the leather. I gave her nothing back. Letting her feel clever was easier than stooping to correct her. But inside, I catalogued the comment, just like I catalogued everything else. Dignity, in our family, was something you wore like a costume, and mine never fit quite right. As the crowd settled for a round of rehearsal toasts, Cyrene grabbed a mic and gave an off-the-cuff preview of her speech. "Family," she said brightly, "isn't just who shows up, it's who shows up and means it." That line landed with a punch, intentional and rehearsed. More claps, some whoops from her side of the lawn. I stood at the edge, my heels sinking slightly into the gravel path. I didn't clap. I didn't even blink. Because I'd shown up. I'd driven 7 hours, wired money, folded my pride neatly into a card no one read. But I hadn't made a scene. That seemed to be the only thing people wanted from me. Not presence, not effort, but quiet. One of the staff approached me then. He was young, polite, probably too new to know the names attached to drama. "Ma'am," he said, handing me a sheet of paper. They updated the seating plan. I took it without thinking, unfolded it slowly. My name was there, printed in neat script, right next to catering service. I felt a laugh rise in my chest, but it didn't escape. I just crumpled the paper in my palm and held onto it. If I have to sit on the sidelines, I might as well start watching what they don't want me to see. By 6 o'clock, the sun had started to melt behind the treetops, casting long amber shadows across the patio. The clink of glasses filled the air, champagne flutes in manicured hands, gold-rimmed and glistening. I returned to the reception space, more out of obligation than desire. I wasn't sure what I expected, but it certainly wasn't to be handed a plastic wine cup filled with something cheap and sour, like the kind you get at a budget gala no one wants to be at. I looked at the table of drinks again. The premium bottles were only being poured into tall, elegant glasses for the select few, those in the inner circle, the same ones who got designer name tags and personalized linen napkins. I stared at my cup a beat longer before taking a sip out of sheer spite. Cyrene breezed past me like a gust of designer air. Her makeup was freshly done, hair pinned into something worthy of an awards ceremony. Behind her trailed a videographer, capturing every staged laugh and over-the-shoulder glance. Romilda followed behind, speaking just loud enough for those around her to hear. She always wanted to be part of the spotlight, poor thing. I didn't need to look to know who she meant. The wine burned going down. They'd been careful up until now, passive-aggressive, but still just inside the boundaries of politeness. That line was about to get crossed. The crowd started to hush as Cyrene raised her glass. She tapped the rim gently, gaining the attention of the few who hadn't already orbited around her. "A quick toast," she smiled, "to showing up, not just in body, but in heart." A few light chuckles. My throat tightened. Something inside me cracked. I gave $3,000, I said, my voice calm, loud enough to reach the front of the circle. Not to be thanked, but not to be erased either. The air snapped. Heads turned. Magner's posture stiffened instantly. He stepped forward before anyone else could process what was happening, his hand gripping a glass of deep red wine. In one sharp motion, he raised it and threw the contents across my chest. It wasn't a splash, it was a statement. The room fell into shocked silence. I didn't flinch. I looked down at my dress, soaked and staining in slow motion. The wet fabric clung to me like betrayal. A woman near the corner gasped. Someone dropped their glass behind me. I heard the click of a camera shutter. This wasn't just rejection, it was erasure, made visible. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I turned and walked off the patio, my shoes sticking slightly to the stone, the cold wine dripping down my side. Inside the women's restroom, I locked the door and faced the mirror. My hair was frizzed from the humidity, mascara slightly smudged. I peeled off the top layer of the dress, dabbing with rough paper towels. Voices echoed faintly through the wall. "She's always been like this," someone muttered. "Can't just let others have their day." I smiled at my own reflection. They can't handle me being quiet or loud. Not their problem anymore. I didn't try to clean the wine. I just dried my face, straightened my spine, and opened the door. Romilda was waiting near the coat check. "Oh, there you are," she said. "By the way, your +1 wasn't accounted for. We'll need you to cover that dinner plate." I stared at her. "I paid more than just the plate, Mother," I said, not raising my voice. "I paid in dignity." She blinked. But before she could speak, I walked past her. Outside again, the night was folding in. I walked the edge of the lawn until I reached the far end, near the garden archway where the reception table sat. A banner, strung above the head table, read, "Celebrating Cyrene," in calligraphy I recognized from one of my own designs, one I'd made years ago for someone else's wedding. I pulled out my phone, typed a note to myself, then deleted it. There was nothing to say that I hadn't already lived. Not everything needs to be said aloud, but that doesn't mean it won't be answered. As I returned toward the tent, a vibration buzzed in my palm. A message from an unfamiliar number. Updated video lineup attached. I opened it. My clip. Gone. The list now ended with Cyrene closing tribute. My breath steadied. My hands didn't tremble. My face still damp. I stared out at the tent glowing under string lights like it was its own little kingdom. Okay, war it is. The room smelled faintly of eucalyptus and starch, whatever linen spray the venue used to hide stress. I sat in a folding chair in a side room, not far from the ballroom, flipping slowly through the wedding program that had been handed to me earlier. I hadn't looked at it before. Maybe I didn't want to see it. But now, in this quiet corner, the truth was waiting. Special thanks. It was printed in gold script, its own kind of spotlight. Cyrene's name came first, naturally. Then Romilda. A few distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in a decade. Even the florist got a mention. Not me. I whispered it to myself, almost like reading an epitaph. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me erased on paper, too. My name, absent. My money, invisible. My time, unmentioned. My presence, inconvenient. A knock at the doorway snapped me back. A coordinator peeked in. "They're doing family photos now," she said with a polite smile. "If you want to join." I stood, smoothed my skirt, and followed the flow of people heading toward the garden arch, where a camera crew was assembling the wedding party. Romilda was directing traffic like a producer on set. "Immediate family only, please. Let's keep this efficient." I stepped forward. Her hand touched my elbow, firm, guiding. "You can join the friends group after this shot." I felt the eyes, a few glances, a murmur or two. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I simply stepped back and watched the family arrange themselves without me. The camera clicked. Another photo I wouldn't be in. Another moment I wouldn't be allowed to claim. As I turned to walk away, I passed the hallway just outside the prep room. Voices floated through the half-open door. Magnar's voice, gruff and amused. "Cyrene's really the only one who counts these days. The other one, well, she's just around. Laughter followed. Not cruel, not sharp, just easy, like it had been said before. And I stood still. They weren't punishing me for who I was. They were deleting me for what I refused to become. I moved quickly after that, back to the side room where no one was watching. Pulled out my phone, opened a blank message. Romilda, I've never asked for much. Deleted. Tried again. I want you to know how it feels to... Deleted. They don't deserve my silence, but they don't deserve my voice either. Not like this. Instead, I sat in that chair, my phone warm in my hand, and thought about all the ways I'd made myself useful over the years. Quietly covering bills no one noticed, ghostwriting thank you notes for gifts they didn't even buy, stepping into problems and never asking for credit, just hoping someone would say, "We see you." I heard a shuffle outside the door. Looked up. Elzira. She was trying to walk toward me, slowly, her hand gripping the edge of the doorframe. But before she could step in, Cyrene's assistant appeared like a shadow. "We need you in the main hall now," she said, gently but firmly. Elzira looked toward me, her eyes soft, steady. She mouthed something. I couldn't hear it. The room was too loud now with the buzzing of my own thoughts, the thrum of the speakers playing wedding playlist filler. But I didn't need to hear the words. She sees me. That's enough. I nodded once, and she was guided away, swallowed back into the event I never truly belonged to. I stayed seated for a few minutes longer, letting the noise fade again. Then my phone buzzed. New email. Subject: change in video sequence. Approved by Romilda. I opened the attachment, scrolled to the end. Final segment. Tribute to Cyrene. Of course. My fists clenched. But my breath stayed calm. This was never about the spotlight. It was about telling the story right. And I'm not done telling it. The hallway behind the ballroom smelled like a mix of hairspray, floor wax, and somebody's cologne. Cheap, aggressive, clinging to the air. I moved through it like a ghost, brushing past boxes of votive candles and spare linens, unnoticed by the staff who were too busy hustling trays and clipboards to look up. I didn't belong in the guest list, and I sure as hell didn't belong in the family photos, but I fit just fine back here, where no one expected anything from me. Through the slats of a half-open folding partition, I watched Romilda and Cyrene pose again under the arch of imported peonies. Cyrene adjusted her chin as a photographer angled the light just right. She giggled into Romilda's shoulder while a wedding planner fixed the drape of her dress for the fourth time. They don't plan events, I murmured to myself. They choreograph illusions. One of the AV techs came around the corner, shaking his head and mumbling to the guy walking next to him. They changed the queue order again. Last-minute overwrite. Bride's family gave new instructions. That speech video, it's out. My heart skipped. I stepped closer, careful not to draw attention. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice even. "Was there a change to the videos?" He blinked at me, uncertain. Yeah, some segments got cut, tribute stuff. I think the final program's updated on the master file." I pulled out my phone, opened the shared media schedule, scrolled fast. There it was, my pre-recorded clip, marked with a red slash and a note, "Removed at mother's request." Cyrene now had 2 tribute slots. 2. For a second, I didn't feel anger. I felt something colder. A slow hardening, like wet cement setting in the pit of my stomach. I didn't react, just turned and walked deeper into the service corridor, like I had somewhere to be. I ended up outside a side door half ajar, dim hallway lights flickering overhead. Inside, Romilda sat across from an older man in a gray suit, legal folders open between them. "She's tired," Romilda was saying. "Just get her to sign. She won't ask questions." The man nodded, glancing down at the paperwork. I knew that man. He'd handled Grandpa's estate years ago. I stepped back quickly before either of them noticed me, heart pounding. They weren't planning a celebration. They were managing an acquisition. It wasn't just a wedding, they were trying to secure a narrative. And I had stumbled into the parts they never meant to stage. I opened my email, forwarded myself a time-stamped note of what I'd overheard. Then I took out my phone camera and started walking again, snapping photos of anything I could quietly capture. the whiteboard timeline in the AV booth, the new cue sheet, the paper labeled Revise, signature pages sitting half-tucked under someone's laptop. Every corner of silence held something they didn't want named. They thought I was sulking. I was documenting. My silence wasn't surrender. It was setup. On my way back down the corridor, a vendor in an apron stopped me. He didn't smile, just pressed a sealed envelope into my hand and said under his breath, "You didn't get this from me." I waited until I turned the corner before opening it. Inside was a printed AV cue sheet. Someone had written across it in slanted black pen, "Romilda removed your video, replaced with tribute number 2. I stared at the words for a long moment, not surprised, but finally, ready. You wanted a silent daughter. You're about to get a loud witness. The ballroom lights dimmed to a soft golden hue, the kind meant to flatter everyone's skin and blur the tension thickening in the air. At every table, glasses clinked, plates scraped, and laughter hummed just beneath the surface, manufactured like everything else that day. I stood near the AV booth, my heart steady, not fast. That surprised me. "Can you load this?" I asked the technician, holding out the flash drive. He hesitated, eyes darting toward the printed cue sheet taped to the side of the booth. "I know," I said, voice low. "But I have the original program, with my name on it. Here." I unfolded the paper I'd pulled from my purse earlier. "You see this red ink? It wasn't from the planner. It was added after. And you know it." He stared at it, then back at me. "They removed me," I said. "Let's put it back." He gave the smallest of nods, and then the screen above the head table flickered. Cyrene was finishing her final tribute, complete with a slow-motion montage of her and Soren as kids, while soft indie music played under staged narration. She gave her best pageant wave, and people applauded like it was reflex. But then, click. A new video began to play. No background music, no voiceover, just handheld, shaky footage clearly taken from a child's tablet, a small hand covering part of the lens, and voices. Romilda's, unmistakable. "Just make it look like she didn't help. It's cleaner that way." Cyrene responded off-screen, casual. "No problem. No one's going to ask. They never do." For 2 seconds, there was silence in the room, then gasps. A server dropped a tray of dessert forks. Someone sucked in a breath hard enough to be heard across the hall. Cyrene's smile froze. I walked forward. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. The mic at the front was still on. "If you're going to erase me," I said, voice carrying clear and even, "at least be honest about it." I didn't need to shout. I didn't cry. I let the silence work. Romilda stood near the bar, frozen. Magnar turned to the AV tech and hissed, "Turn it off. Now." The technician didn't move. I turned back to the room. I gave money. I gave time. I gave care. And I was told that none of it counted. Because I didn't post it, because I didn't pose with it, because I wasn't loud. The groomsman at the far left table clapped once, then stopped, embarrassed. Soren looked at the floor. Romilda still hadn't moved. Cyrene had stepped down from the stage mid-clap. Her face was pale, her mouth pressed into a line that no longer curled upward. Elzira sat perfectly still, her napkin clenched in her hand like it was a lifeline. I left the mic where it was and walked slowly back to my seat. No one followed me. No one tried to hug me or pat my back. They just watched. The same way people watch a glass shatter in a room where no one's allowed to speak. The only sound was the soft hum of the projector winding down. Back at my table, I sat quietly, folding my hands over my lap. A staffer passed by, expression unreadable, and slid something under my plate without a word. I waited until they walked away before unfolding the linen napkin. In sharp pen strokes, a single message. "There's more they tried to bury. Meet me outside after the cake." I refolded the napkin, slipped it into my clutch, and kept my eyes forward. The screen showed the lie. Now I need the paper trail. The napkin was still in my hand, folded so tightly the edges had softened into creases. I slipped out the side exit, the music from inside muffled by the thick walls and the weight of what had just happened. Every cell in my body should have been shaking, but I felt still. like the moment right before a storm hits. Not chaos, not yet. Just the knowing. The note had said, after the cake. It was now 15 minutes past the cutting. The cheers had already faded, replaced by awkward small talk and the hum of discomfort that followed my impromptu speech and the video that had played without approval. The garden behind the tent was quiet. Moonlight stretched across the stone path, cool and detached. I found him by the loading truck. He was smoking a thin cigarette, one foot propped on a crate of linens. He didn't greet me, just nodded once and dropped a folder into my tote. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. As I walked away, I caught a flash of memory, Cyrene's face on the screen earlier. Her perfectly contoured jawline frozen mid-toast, her eyes darting as the recording played. Just make it look like she didn't help. It's cleaner. Her voice, casual, calculated. People had frozen. Champagne flutes paused mid-air. A few guests tried to whisper over each other, but no one knew what to say. That silence had carried weight. Romilda had stepped toward the mic, smiling like nothing happened. "A small misunderstanding," she'd said, but no one clapped, not even the cousins who usually clapped out of habit. And Cyrene, she had walked straight off the stage, her heels clicking with urgency, her eyes darting, her lipstick bleeding just slightly at the corner from where she'd pressed her mouth shut too hard. Inside the garden now, I sat on the cold bench near the hedges and opened my phone. A new message appeared. From Cyrene. "Make sure she doesn't speak. She's dangerous." It was meant for someone else, but it landed in my inbox. Dangerous? No, just done being polite. I opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, AV edits, cue instructions, all marked up with red pen. My name crossed out. Romilda's handwriting. There were copies of legal slips too, initialed pages from Elzira's estate files, dated only weeks prior, when she'd supposedly updated her financial control. But the handwriting was shaky, the witness lines empty. I stared at it all. It was never just about a wedding. It was about erasing a witness. My grandmother's autonomy. My presence. All rewritten in ink they thought would never be read. My hands shook a little now, but not from fear. From fury held too long. A photographer wandered out, camera still slung around his shoulder. He offered a smile, hesitant. "Do you want one last candid, just for you?" I almost said no, but then I stood, brushed off my dress, faced him directly. "Take it," I said. And he lifted the camera and clicked once. No posing, no forced expression, just me, dignified, messy, real. This is what being seen looks like. The photo won't land in a slideshow. It won't get a caption or a quote about family unity, but it would exist, and for once, that was enough. I tucked the folder into my bag and walked toward the front of the venue. The night was cooler now, and the tent glowed in soft gold from inside. I could hear laughter, but it was smaller, brittle. "If truth had a taste," I whispered, "it wouldn't be sweet. It'd be iron. Like blood, like resolve." I pushed the doors open and stepped back into the hall. Let's finish this. The reception was dying, and everyone knew it, even the ones still holding champagne glasses and pretending nothing had happened. The air felt thicker than before, like the walls were holding secrets they couldn't swallow anymore. I stood near the archway by the side entrance, watching people drift toward the valet line in clumps, half-hearted hugs, stiff smiles, unspoken questions hanging between them. Romilda tried to rally the crowd with one last toast, raising her glass and saying, "Thank you all for your love and energy. This family has always thrived on unity." A few clapped, most didn't. One woman leaned toward her husband and muttered, "She should have stopped while she was ahead." I didn't clap either. Instead, I walked calmly to the front desk near the main entrance, where a clipboard sat beside a wedding contract folder. "I need to speak with the venue manager," I told the woman behind the counter. She looked up, confused but polite. "Is there an issue?" "Yes," I said. I'm retracting my sponsorship." The manager came over within minutes. I introduced myself, showed ID, pulled out a printed copy of the contract. "The reservation for tonight's venue was booked through my corporate account," I said. "This check," I tapped the invoice stapled to it, was signed by me. I'd like it canceled, effective now. He hesitated. I need to confirm with the family. The name on the signature line is mine. I cut in gently. You won't need further confirmation. He looked again, read the line twice. Understood. 10 minutes later, decorators began unfastening the garlands. String lights flickered off section by section. The custom signage was rolled away. Some guests paused, blinking at the shift like they weren't sure if the night had ended or they were still being punished for staying. Is she the candle seller? Someone whispered behind me. No, another voice corrected. She audits corporate finance. Big firms. Another woman chimed in. She didn't lose her mind tonight. She exposed all of them. I didn't turn around, but I did smile, just slightly. They finally saw me. Not the backup, not the invisible one, the hammer. Across the room, I caught Romilda arguing with the venue manager. Her face was pale, but her voice was still sharp, filled with disbelief. I need you to keep everything in place, she said. You can't just pull the setup because of one upset daughter. The manager raised a hand. Ma'am, the legal signer revoked the booking. It's non-refundable, and our contract was with her, not you. Romilda turned slowly, her gaze locking on mine. She said nothing. But for the first time all night, I saw it in her face. She had no script for this. Cyrene moved past her in silence, avoiding every eye in the room. She didn't stop to hug anyone, just pulled her jacket tight over her dress and marched toward the front door. No entourage followed. No cameras clicked. Magnar trailed behind, muttering to himself, jaw tight, eyes glassy. He didn't stop either. Elzira walked with measured steps, her arm looped through a nurse's elbow. When she reached me, she didn't speak. She just took my hand and gave it a squeeze, steady, certain. It was all I needed. I stayed until the last of the decorations were boxed. A server approached, holding an envelope. This came from accounting, he said. They said it's the refund for unused catering, still under your name. I opened it. Inside was a folded check, plus a handwritten note in unfamiliar print. You paid the price. Now claim the stage. I didn't cry. I folded the note, tucked it in my clutch, and stepped out into the night. The cold air hit my face like a wake-up call I had already answered. The lounge felt too quiet for a hotel still pulsing with guests. I sat alone near the fireplace, a half-finished cup of tea in my hands, now room temperature and bitter. The cushion beneath me barely softened the weight in my chest. Through the large glass panels, I watched as Romilda floated through the lobby, trying to salvage whatever grace she still thought she carried. Her laugh rang out too sharply, each wave of her hand too choreographed. Guests smiled at her, but their eyes darted elsewhere, toward doorways, elevators, anywhere that wasn't her face. When the performance ends, I whispered to myself, the crowd thins. Truth empties a room. Soren found me 20 minutes later, hands tucked into his suit pockets, expression unreadable. He sat down without asking. You didn't have to go that far, he said softly. I looked at him. I didn't, I replied. I let them. He sighed, rubbing at his brow like he wanted to say more, but didn't have the words. You know, Mom and Dad, they just... No, I said, voice steady. They chose. So did you. He didn't argue. And maybe that was worse. I didn't expect him to pick sides, not anymore. Soren had always existed between thresholds, half committed, half oblivious. But this was the first time I felt the need to release him. Not out of punishment, but because I finally knew I didn't need anything from him. Not even understanding. I hope she's happy, I said. Cyrene, I really do. He nodded once, then stood and left without another word. The lobby had begun to clear. Families tugged on jackets. Waiters stacked chairs in the distance. A little girl, my niece, maybe 5, approached me, holding up a piece of crayon-scribbled paper. I drew everybody, she beamed. Wanna see? I smiled and took it. Crude stick figures in pastel gowns. A banner that read Wedding Day. Cyrene had a tiara. Soren had a big blue bow tie. Elzira was sitting in a chair. I wasn't there. She tilted her head. Did you just get here late? I knelt in front of her. No, sweetie, I said gently. I just wasn't invited to the picture. She blinked, then hugged my leg before running off toward the dessert table. I folded the drawing and slipped it into my purse. Back in my hotel room, the quiet wrapped around me like a coat I hadn't realized I needed. I pulled out the crumpled receipt from earlier, the catering refund, and placed it beside the unused video script I had once written with care. They don't deserve the best version of me anymore, I whispered. I do. I began packing. No rush, no theatrics. Just the slow, final sweep of someone who no longer owed an apology for leaving. My hand paused as I saw the note I had written hours earlier, one I hadn't decided whether to deliver. To Elzira, I added 2 more words before folding it neatly and slipping it under her door. You were always the truth I clung to. I walked past the ballroom once more. The lights were dimmed now. Only staff remained. No one looked up, and for once, I didn't want them to. Outside, the air was crisp. I spotted the hired driver leaning on the hood of the black sedan. He opened the back door as I approached. I paused, not to look at the building behind me, but at my own reflection in the car window. No bitterness, no need to look back. I left the table, I said softly to my reflection. Now I get to build one where I belong. I slid into the seat. The door closed, and the car pulled away from the place I would never return to. The law office was quiet, but not sterile. Warm wood bookshelves lined the back wall, and a window cracked open let in the faint scent of juniper and sun-warmed stone. I sat across from the attorney, placing the folder gently on the glass desk, like it was fragile, even though its contents had already shattered something much bigger. She opened the folder and scanned the first page, her brows slowly knitting. This is more than enough. I'm not here to punish them, I said, my voice even. I'm here to end their leverage. It had taken me a week to breathe, to sleep a full night, to gather everything and place it into that folder without shaking. But now, sitting in that chair, I didn't feel like a woman unraveling. I felt like a woman closing a loop. She tapped her pen against the desk. We'll begin with the financials. Guardianship, misuse of funds, the estate redraft attempt. This could be civil and criminal. You're sure you want to pursue both? I nodded. They took her name off paper. Let's put theirs on record. By the time I stepped out of the building, the wind had picked up. I crossed the street to a quiet cafe on the corner, one I used to visit with Elzira when she still lived downtown, before the world decided she needed to be managed. I ordered black coffee and sat at a patio table facing the mountains. For the first time in days, the view didn't feel far away. It felt earned. My phone buzzed. A headline: Durango woman challenges family over inheritance fraud. It wasn't front-page news, just a local piece. But it was enough. Comments trickled in online. One read, "We always knew something was off. Thank you for speaking up." Another, "Family isn't blood. It's who tells the truth." I didn't reply. I didn't like or heart or share, but I screenshot each one, not for validation, but for remembrance. Later, I opened my purse and pulled out the original letter I had tucked into the $3,000 envelope all those weeks ago. Somehow, someone had uploaded it. It had gone viral. People were quoting the last lines in Instagram captions, sharing them over coffee, reading them aloud in workshops. If being quiet made me kind, I'll be kind in truth. If being visible made me selfish, I'll be selfish in light. I didn't write that to be brave. I wrote it to be whole. Now, it belonged to more people than I ever imagined. Elzira had been relocated to a place she actually liked, a small senior residence with views of the foothills and a garden with native plants she could name by scent alone. I visited her once a week now. No cameras, no stage, just books, real conversation, and silence that felt earned. She was back in control of her life. And I was the one who signed the paperwork this time, not Ramilda, not Magnar, me, and this time, my name was spelled right. The wind picked up again, lifting a napkin from my table. I caught it and smiled. I opened my journal, not to rant or relive, but to record what mattered next. They planned a wedding to show the world who mattered, I wrote. I used the same event to prove it. I stared at the last page a while, then added a single line, steady and deliberate. I wasn't erased. I was just in pencil. And I chose the pen. The waitress came to refill my coffee. Anything else? She asked kindly. I looked up at her and shook my head. No. But thank you. As she walked away, I turned the page and wrote one more line. Just for me. And if they ever try to rewrite me again, I'll be holding the ink.